With Starfield around the corner, the promise of a new Bethesda experience had me thinking back on the studio's catalog and how unique these games are in the industry. They embody a form of RPGs that you don't really see elsewhere. Sure, there are many open worlds out there where the pitch go anywhere, do anything apply, but I've never felt that games like Breath of the Wild or The Witcher 3 are sharing the same DNA as Skyrim or Fallout. I think it's because the true predecessor of the Bethesda games are not action-adventure RPGs. It's instead what's probably the most influential game ever made. It's just not a video game. Dungeons and Dragons. A game that sure lets you go anywhere and do anything, but I think that the secret ingredient always was a third form of liberty. Be anyone. You know, the R from RPG. Role. The pitch is embodying anyone, may it be mechanically with classic archetypes like rogues, warriors, mages, or narratively, by giving a certain form of values and a backstory to this imaginary being you created. And at its core, I think this is what Bethesda is trying to sell you. An immersive world where you get to live whatever life you want. You are creating something too. It's not just them. They are the dungeon master, the DM, and you are the player. You go through an adventure that is your own, and it's no coincidence that we see players with hundreds of hours in these games that have yet to finish the main quest. Your journey is yours, and every choice you make as a storyteller too. It's just that you won't find your name in the credits. But the reason I'm making this video is that I think they are forgetting that it's what makes them special. The place of the player's storytelling in all aspects, may it be the be anyone, the do anything, or the go anywhere, is less and less present. A quick tour through their games can show how the mechanical and narrative impacts of the player's role change from Morrowind to Fallout 4, and why that latest entry really differs from the rest. And maybe, I'll even talk about Fallout 76. It's just that I don't enjoy beating a dead armored horse.
You there. Step forward.
For this video, I've decided to replay the entirety of both latest entries in their respective series, Skyrim and Fallout 4, but also the first couple of hours of the other games. I wanted to see how the role you chose to embody would matter, what opportunity do you have to express yourself mechanically and narratively. And after going through that exercise, it became clear to me how the game design around the player agency changed, but also how different the approach is between the Elder Scrolls series and Fallout. Before we go deeper, what do I mean by player agency in terms of mechanics and narrative? For me, it would broadly be defined as the space given to the player to approach the game in a way that fits the role they chose. For example, in terms of mechanics, it wouldn't really matter if you chose to play a rogue if the whole level design is a bunch of corridors with a single way in and out. There would be no way to stealth your way through, even if you were to spec your stats around that role. That way of playing would only exist on paper. In the reality of the gameplay, it wouldn't translate to an achievable experience. There needs to be an adequation of player mechanics and world mechanics for the role to make sense. Narratively, I think it's easier to conceptualize how limiting it can be in a game. Dialogue choices with no real differences between them, answers that would seem obvious but that aren't in the options, or a lack of possible actions to take in a quest that would fit different types of personalities. We've all had that experience of wanting to choose a third option that isn't presented and the game just isn't prepared for it. And we will delve deeper in that notion later in this video. For now, let's look at narrative agency.
I've seen you.
We'll begin by looking at how these games introduce you narratively as a player character. The Elder Scrolls series function very similarly from game to game. You always begin as a prisoner, there's always a prophecy that will be the foundation for the main quest, and after the tutorial section, you are sent to deliver a message. What I like about that way of introducing you to the world is that it says nothing about who you are as a character, except for the fact that you've been imprisoned. And that doesn't really say a lot about you. It probably says more about the world that even the most virtuous of men, which you might be if that's what you want, can end up in jail. So you're free from that point on to be whoever you want. Yes, there is that impending prophecy, but unlike other RPGs we know, you can easily rationalize how you would interfere in this, and how you can see other elements as more important to you. Because you decide what matters, which does not function when it's a named character with relationships already established. The classic point where you ask yourself why would Link lose its time on capturing chickens while Zelda is still in danger, or why would Geralt go around playing Gwent while his daughter is still missing? The absence of a clear backstory creates a space for you to fill. They leave the player character as a blank canvas and you get to choose the ink you paint it with. And in terms of RPGs, I think it's part of what makes it compelling, which is not the case with Fallout.
Big world out there, son. Full of all sorts of people. What about you? What kind of person are you going to be?
Fallout 3 and 4 start you off with exactly the opposite notion. A prior relationship is going to be the defining element of the main quest. In Fallout 3, which by the way also decides the age of your character, it's your father fleeing the vault, which still leaves you with a bit of wiggle room since you can rationalize that you don't want anything to do with a father that left you behind. But in Fallout 4, it's your infant son. And this one, unless you're an absolute psychopath, no matter the person you want to play as, this should become your absolute priority. So if you want to enjoy the game in your own way, going around exploring and doing random quests, you already are at odds with the person you embody. Oh, and by the way, they also pre-establish your character's past occupation, which depends on you being a male or a female character. See how this is getting closer and closer to other RPGs with pre-established main characters? The biggest difference being that these other games actually use it to create a compelling and complex character. As part of this reinvention, your character is now voice acted, which to me was another blow to my immersion and to my place as a storyteller. The silent protagonists of the earlier entries would leave it to your imagination and make it easier for you to project yourself in the situation. I doubt most of us acted out as we would in a D&D game, but I think there's an unconscious way we engage with a dialogue system where we kind of put a bit of ourselves in it. It's not uncommon to hear about people feeling bad for what they did to NPCs that are just a bunch of ones and zeros. But once the main character gets voice acted, it makes it harder to get this form of engagement. There's now a very potent distance between you and the character. I mean, listen to this and tell me you're not being told who you are.
Come on! There has to be a release! Come on, come on, come on! Oh, God!
I'll find who did this, and I'll get Sean back. I promise.
So in terms of introducing the player character, Bethesda games tried to offer something close to the freedom of a blank character page until Fallout 4 came out. And that wasn't the only thing that changed drastically. In these RPGs, one of the most notable aspects of its simulation is the ability to interact with almost anyone. Starting with the pure text-based system we saw in Morrowind, it was then refined with the apparition of voice-acted NPCs in Oblivion, which stayed as a staple of the studio up until our main concern for this video, Fallout 4. The voice-acted main character was one of the two changes in the dialogue system, the second one being the now infamous 4 answers system. In this game, no matter what is said to you, you now have 4 ways to answer, one for each of the action buttons of a controller. It's such a mechanical way to approach storytelling, and the redundancy of the 4 possible answers often reminded me of a college student trying to up his word count on an essay by finding new ways of repeating the same thing. Fallout 4 tries to tell you that yup, yep, and yes are distinct answers, and even worse, they try to hide it behind the fact that they don't present you the complete answer you'll give, just an indication. It's an illusion so shallow that once shattered, you won't be able to unsee it. It's everywhere, it's forced and unnatural, and it really puts a dent on the player's ability to express their specificity as a character, which was technically present to a lesser extent in prior games too. There's not a lot of choices per se, but at least it doesn't try to lie to you about it. Quests are usually linear and on the simple side, but there are still some places where you get to make choices. Oblivion usually had a lot of twists and turns in its quests, to a point where you would know that it almost never would be as it seems, but it shows that the trajectory going from Bethesda's earlier work to its latest is one of simplification. streamlining storytelling, more and more linear design, and less player agency. Playing Fallout 4, it felt to me like the storytelling tried to be a classic linear action shooter with an open world as a distraction between the missions. It's two games in one at war with the other, their design contradicting themselves. It felt like I was responsible for my own immersion. I had to maintain the believability of the world because the game wasn't trying to. The Railroad, Brotherhood, Minutemen, and Institute missions that kind of run in parallels are the final boss of consistency. Plot holes accumulate like unclean dishes during your finals week because the game lets you go around playing double or triple agent without really managing to acknowledge it. The good old trick of just do as they say until you finish their questline really stretches any kind of rationalization. And then you also have a very forced conflict between factions that shouldn't really care about each other, like how the Railroad despises the Minutemen for their views, even though you are their leader. You literally decide what they do. The story is, for the lack of a better word, unstable, unable to deal with any form of complexity, and the work of the player as a storyteller becomes more and more about thinking of a way of dodging inconsistency instead of using imagination to enrich their adventure with meaning. Which they did in the Far Harbor DLC, which was probably possible due to its smaller scale, but if they want to apply it to their main game, they must choose between including unnecessary complexity or going back to exclusive factions like in Morrowind or in Skyrim's DLC. It's not a perfect solution, it hinders the freedom of choice, but at least it accepts its own limitations as a simulation and makes it easier to maintain a narrative experience where the player's choice can actually be processed and reacted to in a believable manner. The hardest thing for a computer to understand is the intent behind the action. AI still is far away from the good old classic human eye in terms of adaptability and integration of the player's intentions. If Skyrim was sometimes simpler than its older brother Oblivion, Fallout 4 transformed most of its objectives into fetch quests with almost no narrative complexity, where even the Radiant quests, infinitely AI-generated questing, sometimes pass as the main quest objectives for the factions you follow. This would be bearable if the impact of those quests would make them compelling, if instead of 300 caps and half a level you could see them truly help the faction, if it could be one of the elements that influences the winner of certain conflicts, if the settlement system could have an affiliation with factions, like making settlements into safe houses for the Railroad, outposts for the Brotherhood, or surface labs for the Institute. Anything that would let you express yourself meaningfully in the world as the narrator of your own story. The interaction of mechanics and narrative are unconvincing. But what about the aspects that are purely mechanical?
There is another thing you could do for me. Suitable for someone of your particular talents, perhaps.
The mechanical aspects of Bethesda's games are usually a mix of the classic RPGs with a progression system built around stats, skills, and perks, and a first-person immersive sim where you get to approach situations in different ways depending on your skill set. It tries to emulate the flexibility of paper RPGs to give the player that same sense of liberty, usually by choosing between fighting your way through, stealthing around, and sometimes picking your way out of a situation. But no video game can incorporate a level of adaptability similar to the unrestrained imagination of a dungeon master, and so it's important to include in our reflection the many technical limitations that hinder the intended experience of the theme. And just like we did with the narrative agency, I'd like to look at the introductions of these games, their first couple of hours, how they present their mechanics to the player, how they teach them to you, and how they give you, or don't give you, the opportunity to express yourself through your actions. In terms of introduction, Morrowind probably has the leanest approach of all, since it doesn't even have a big intro section which also presents the largest story to the player. You get out of the boat, you create your character, you have a couple of tutorial boxes that explain the controls, and that's pretty much it. You don't have the mandatory combat tutorial, no forced sections to go through. In the time you choose your class and walk through about 3 or 4 rooms, you're out in the world and free. And without a proper map in terms of modern game design, you actually have to ask around how to navigate this world. The absence of guidance from game mechanics actually invites you to engage in the world, talk to NPCs, and see them as more than just walking animatrons. The purely text-based conversation system also gives Morrowind a lot of opportunity to create NPCs that can answer you on a larger set of questions. Mechanically, Morrowind wants you to feel like a stranger trying to tame a new land. And I don't know how much of it was intentional and how much was due to this new way of making games, both in technological terms and in game design, but this really immerses you in a different way than any Bethesda game that came after it. The world won't adapt to you, you adapt to it. Talking is necessary in combat and stealth are both valid in their approach, but they certainly are both mechanically quite crude in the experience they propose. Morrowind still is a 2002 release and the edges are rough, but beyond that, what you can see is a game that really tried to give you all these options, but that was limited by its time. Bethesda never made a harsher world than this, for better and for worse.
I have seen the gates of Oblivion.
And so Oblivion arrives with its corners a little bit more sanded. The introduction to the game is a proper tutorial, gradually presenting every playstyle as you escape through some dungeons with Patrick Stewart talking to you about astrology. You'll find every type of weapons and armors, you'll have the opportunity to stealth around and to use magic, you'll be introduced to traps and the new physics engine. Oblivion validates every type of role with this approach, and even reacts to the way you played by having a character tell you that, from what he saw, you look like a certain class.
But from what I've seen of you, I'm guessing you're an experienced acrobat.
The class system makes its second and final showing here, and is, simply put, a way to make certain skills level up faster than others. Because in the Elder Scrolls series, you don't level up through experience points, you level your skills by using them. Every time you hit someone with your blade, every step you take as you sneak around an unwary enemy, it all participates to level up the skill you are using. And after a certain amount of level gained in these skills, your character's level goes up and you get to invest points in attributes that interact with the skills, making you stronger. And so turns the wheel. Without going deeper into how poorly designed some elements of this system were, it still is a very potent mechanical feedback to the role you adopt. Your character becomes what you make of it, and so the progression becomes a testament to your playstyle, and again, the system was broken, but you can still see how central the player's role was. And when you get out of the tutorial area, you have a first dungeon right in front of you, and most players will probably try their luck there, and you have it all. A source of magic at the beginning that enhances your magicka if you're a mage, traps and enemies showing you their back for that sweet style character, and of course every opportunity to just smash every opponent if you are a warrior. Bethesda put that there as this first experience of the outside world and reinforced the lessons already present in the tutorial. That's good game design. It is okay for the game to put you in situations where some roles are more suitable than others, but you certainly want to introduce the player to the world in a way that lets them play as they want. And that notion, offering an adaptable playground for the player, will be one of the flaws of Fallout 4, but it wasn't as much the case for Fallout 3.
It was here you were born. It is here you will die. Because in Vault 101, no one ever enters, and no one ever leaves.
Fallout 3 was the first entry of the series from Bethesda, taking the IP into the 3D world after buying it from Interplay Productions. Fallout was a groundbreaking isometric RPG known for its total freedom of playstyles, perfecting its innovative inclusion of coherent and well-thought-out pacifist playthroughs. Fallout has a different approach to its character building than the Elder Scrolls. First, attributes, now named specials, are decided not by your race, but by you. You have a set amount of attribute points to distribute, and it's your choice to min-max or to create a jack-of-all-trades. Even though, since intelligence governs the amount of skill points you get, it's almost always the correct option to max it. So where Oblivion had skills be the defining factor of attributes, Fallout 3 positioned itself in the opposite way. And in both cases, it gives a nice space for the players to express themselves. It exemplifies that many approaches can lead to the same feeling of being recognized if they are implemented for the same reason: player agency. The end of the tutorial is where you start to see the cracks. There is not a lot of space to stealth or talk your way through, even though it would have been a great occasion to do so. It would certainly fit thematically and narratively, but it's not the end of the world. Anyway, as soon as you get out, you get your chance to play the way you want. Once out of the vault, most people will find their way to Megaton, and might even encounter Silver, an ex-prostitute trying to untangle herself from the grasp of her former pimp. She wants you to tell him she won't work for him again. If you want, you can try a speech check to get paid in advance, and from there you could not do anything and just keep the caps. Or maybe you don't want to be paid at all, even though you might be skilled enough to persuade her.
You'd do that for me? I can't believe it. You hardly even know me.
What a perfect first situation to encounter. Mechanically, you can get more if you want, but narratively, how do you want to act? How do you feel about this character you have in front of you? Do you have a moral code, or is the pure accumulation of resources your only goal? Look, I'm not saying that this is the writing of the century, but it doesn't have to be, because all it wants to be is an opportunity for you to write that first chapter of who you are in this world. It's simple but effective, and I know that Fallout 3 is not the greatest at that, not even close, and that it stays shallow for most of its run. But still, there's something there, a glimpse of what was intended, of what could be. And all I just said would make a much more valid point without the karma system. A quantified tracker of good and bad deeds, universally applied as if morality was objective, once and for all proving that Bethesda devs are all uptight avid conch readers. This robs the player of the meaning of their action. It is a classic case of a game that would be better off without a feature they implemented. For me, Fallout 3 was a fork in the road, where you see a studio struggling to deal with the legacy they inherited, still creating something that could aspire to greatness, but that is hindered by its contradicting design choices. And then their biggest title ever came out and changed the trajectory of the studio.
Show us, Dragonborn. Let us taste of your voice.
Skyrim is Bethesda's cultural behemoth, a game that found its way into pop culture, and it's hard not to see its efforts to streamline most of its systems as a way to make it more approachable. Gone are the attributes, replaced by a choice between an upgrade to your health, your stamina, or your magicka. The new perk system is compelling, making it easier to visualize your progression and to add an appreciated element of choice in your build. All the elements of persuasion, charisma, or speechcraft are now relegated to its mercantile aspects. A silver tongue in the land of Skyrim can only hope to haggle better prices. But to what avail? There's no real economy in Skyrim outside the couple of heavily priced houses in different cities. Don't get me wrong, there never was any economic complexities akin to the likes of Mont and Blades, but when there's a whole skill dedicated to it, well, let's say that Skyrim really hopes that the player's roleplaying will do the distance. You can statistically become a merchant, but you won't find any echoes in the game's systems. Once you get out of that crazy opening with a similar tutorialization to Oblivion, you are free. There's also an inviting first dungeon that will show you what you will get to do in this game. In fact, almost the only thing you will do for the hundreds of hours you'll spend in this world. Questlines are shallower than the ones we could see in Oblivion, and Skyrim really chose its lane. Literally Dungeons and Dragons. Not the classic RPG, but the literal meaning of those words. You go around dungeoneering and killing dragons. And if I'm critical of its lack of narrative depth, I can't deny that they got that right. Walking through this beautiful world, cleaning it from its dangerous inhabitants, ascending through the addictive progression system, all of it works really well. And there are a couple of interesting quests out there that really use the elements of world building they took the time to create. But most things that will pique your curiosity will end up being a hollowed husk of an idea. Skyrim is, for me, a great game where Bethesda really didn't want you to think more than necessary. Just roam around, have a good time, enjoy yourself. But mechanically, it is the least compelling entry in terms of embodying a role. Stealth and magic are even more relegated as a form of combat than before. It's really seen as a tool for the player to approach its objectives in different ways. And this was the gateway to Fallout 4.
I can only imagine what you've heard, what you think of us.
Our last Bethesda game for this video. In terms of character creation, Fallout 4 is a mix of its direct predecessor and Skyrim. You have your good old special attributes, but the skill system is replaced entirely by perks gated by your character level. It creates a more defined progression curve where you don't get to be the greatest lockpicker 5 or 6 levels into the game while being bad at everything else. It's a system with many possible builds but with less choice inside each of those builds. Perks usually being spread out in a manner that makes it quite obvious what you want to pick when, which I don't see as a big problem. It is still fun, but it's closer to having a big choice at the beginning and then seeing it pay out through your progression. But where Fallout 4 fails really hard for me is the first couple of gameplay moments where the devs created one intended experience and they just don't seem to care what you are playing. Getting out of the vault doesn't offer any of the wide tutorialization we've seen before. You just play whack-a-mole with a couple rat roaches, you go back to your hometown, whack some other insects, and then you'd probably go to Concord for your first real quest. And the level design of Concord creates almost no possibility for player agency. The Minutemen occupy a building in the center of the city and they are fighting raiders. You can kind of sneak behind them, but they are close together, so you'll have to face them head on eventually. Then you'll want to enter the building and there's only one door which leads directly into the action. It's possible to sneak a little between the sections, but it's not really compelling. As you finally meet the Minutemen, they invite you to use the power armor that's on the roof to wipe out the raiders outside, which you already dealt with like 3 minutes ago. But there's a new army, so you climb up and enter the armor, no choice there. And then as the radioactive cherry on top of the lizard sundae, as you blast them with your minigun, a death claw crawls out of the ground and you blast through it too. This felt like a Call of Duty level tacked on a Fallout game. I mean, one of the objectives is literally grab the minigun. Talk about an individual approach to each situation. Not only is Fallout 4's exploration more and more about combat, that combat gives you less tools to approach it uniquely. And when you come back with the Minutemen, they make you their leader after knowing you for 12 seconds, and you get access to the settlement system that, again, looks like a sim game was imported on your save. The NPCs roaming around seem lifeless, nothing happens when you're gone. Nothing puts that system at shame more than the mod sim settlement, where your installations grow with your population as they make this new home theirs. You still get to personalize it if you want, but at least the other inhabitants actually feel like they are trying to be alive in this world. And as these experiences piled on, I wondered, what is this game about? What is its core philosophy? What does it have to say? What does it want you to feel? Like Skyrim, I think they just want you to play without thinking too much. Instead of going through dungeons and killing dragons, you go through runes and you pick up every interactable object because you fear you might miss a certain component in 30 hours. It could be about rebuilding a community in a post-apocalyptic world with the settlements. It could be a survival challenge where even the smallest trip makes you feel the oppression of an hostile world. It could be about posing difficult moral choices by truly using the dialogue system. Or it could be a deep narrative experience with fleshed out characters and deep world building. But it's a shallow version of all of it. There's no meaning, no deeper intent. Fallout 4 lacks a soul. You will enjoy playing it. Hell, I probably spent more time in this game than almost any other because its game design is addictive and engaging, and its world is absolutely gorgeous and detailed. It's not a bad game, but it's just a game. It's not something greater than the sum of its parts. It's an assembly line, and you will feel each of its crudely welded joint. And as a trajectory, it makes sense. The inexperience of Morrowind made it risky and unique, and it birthed a new era for Bethesda. But from there, they started to streamline, to refine, to smooth things out. And as the games released, we lost a little bit of that uniqueness each time. And what makes me laugh in all of that is that they had the perfect blueprint. An entry literally made on the same principles and with the same means, but one with an actual direction, with something to say. Because, as absurd as it may be, the best Bethesda game was not made by Bethesda.
Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
Fallout New Vegas attained an almost mythical status at this point. A lot of people praise it as the greatest RPG of all time. A game made in the Fallout 3 engine with a development time of 18 months managed to offer an experience that profoundly cares about who you embody and how you want to play. It was made by Obsidian, a studio that was host to some of the original Fallout creators that now had their chance to show what they could do with this new formula. You've got an introduction that only specifies that you accepted a courier job and that leaves the rest up to your imagination, to your choosing. They present you with an antagonistic figure which can inspire you revenge or apathy, because you make what you want of it. You don't have a voice-acted line that tells you what you feel. And then the first proper quest makes any choice you made in the character creation matter. Talking is not only a question of using your speech stat. If you decide to defend the town, you'll need help. But to borrow dynamite, you'll need to show you have a good enough understanding of demolition with a skill check. If you want supplies, well, you've got to barter with the greedy merchant. You might want to repair the bar owner's radio to make her feel better about you. Skills are now actually used as a way to interact with the world and with people. It's a solution that was extended from a 2-down version of it present in Fallout 3, and that was used only once in Fallout 4. After that, you go to Prim, where you have to deal with an occupied zone with many power struggles. There's a bunch of enemies holding a hostage in a hotel, and you can enter through the main door or find another entry, which would make sneaking easier. You can repair the central elevator, which changes the way you can go through the level. If, like me, you throw some dynamite in the room full of enemies, you might actually kill the hostage you've been looking for by accident, because there isn't a proper map marker that pinpoints his exact location, as if you were an omnipotent being. And if you kill him, well, there are other solutions to your problems that might involve an infiltration or a better understanding of the political and military powers at work in the Mojave. And that's the first 2 hours of the game. See what I mean? It's like New Vegas actually tries to give you the option to be a fully fledged human instead of a video game character. And of course, it's mechanical and perfect and complete. It will always be bound by the limitations of a simulation. These worlds will always be a show for you to enjoy. But it takes a lot more for you to feel its artificial nature with New Vegas, because the devs decided that the defining element of their game, the thing they had to say, the soul, was what does it mean to embody a role in a game. And by doing so, they created something that feels greater than the sum of its systems, because they actually work in harmony. Mechanics are not created in silos, they permeate their initial function to become a more complete feature. It's just wonderful game design, one that empowers you as the narrator of your own unique story. Fallout New Vegas is the game that stresses me the most about Bethesda's future game design, because its triumph is now old news and it has yet to reflect itself back into the main entries. And I'm starting to doubt that Bethesda are actually aiming at creating this kind of great RPGs, or at least incorporate some of these ideas into their mindset.
Does this mean it is done?
And it kind of breaks my heart, because these worlds they created, they are splendid. And how crazy it is, for example, that you can enter almost any house or building for no gameplay purposes other than immersion. They cared enough to put on the show, to work hard to create a semblance of believability. And you felt the effort, and because of that you didn't care that Oblivion's NPCs were voice acted by only like 8 different people, or that Skyrim's bandits had a preference for knees. But even if we exclude that weird mess of a game that was Fallout 76 from the general trajectory of Bethesda's game design, it makes me wonder what the future will be. Starfield's promise of 1,000 planets made me fear that this is it. This is the end of a world that tries to seem alive, that tries to react to your character, who you want to be. And that this trend of a beautiful place where you get to do busy work is going to be the new soul. So, where do we go from here? I don't have dragon blood, so I won't propose any prophecies. But I can offer hope. Hope that the roots of Bethesda still have life in them, Hope that the studio will trust you for who you are and always have been. Their best writer.